Can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and the bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
You may be seated. Let's thank Troy High School, JROTC, and Tim Kepler for that beautiful rendition of the national anthem. And it's now my pleasure to again welcome to the Nixon Library, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. Aloha. Aloha to nui loa. Was it just me, or did your heart skip a little with those young leaders who are the color guard? I almost had to grab some tissue. You know, it is really inspiring to see these young leaders who take seriously their obligation, even as high school students, and who honor and revere the flag, and who understand what that means as a country. And it's very appropriate for us to start our conversation here tonight on that powerful note, given the Nixon Foundation's campaign, American Civics campaign, to be able to instill these values into more of our young leaders who are coming up. You know, I have the opportunity to travel around the country a lot and get to meet and speak to Americans from all different backgrounds. And what I hear too often is a sense of hopelessness from people who care about our country, who are disheartened about the direction that our country is headed, how we live in a time where over 30% of Gen Zers are not proud to call themselves Americans, and people wondering whether or not we are too far gone as a country to save all that we cherish and hold dear. It can be a depressing thought to think that this is possible in the United States of America. But it's understandable. When oftentimes when you turn on cable news or if you scroll through social media and you see what the reality is of what's going on around us, it's understandable to feel like these times have gotten so dark, and where and how can we find that light of liberty again? When the forces of darkness are filled with power and money and the levers of media and big tech and social media, where is there hope to be found? My husband and I live in Kailua on the island of Oahu, and we're right down the street from the Marine Corps base there. We have some Marines here today? All right. So when we're home, we get up early in the morning and we go and work out at the Semper Fit gym on the Marine Corps base. And the last time I was home, I was out on the running track next to the gym. I had my AirPods in. It was close to 8 o'clock in the morning, and so the morning PT crowd had already gone home. And so I was listening to a podcast as I was running around the track and not really paying attention to what was going on around me, but out of the corner of my eye, I saw a guy who was mowing the lawn around the track all of a sudden stop. And then I saw a woman who was pushing a stroller down the sidewalk all of a sudden stop. And then the car that was driving down the street all of a sudden stopped. What's going on? Pulled out my AirPods, and Reveille was playing. And it was such a beautiful moment on that beautiful Hawaii day to stand there with the Ko'olau Mountains in the backdrop and the American flag there being raised, just to pause and cut through all the noise and take in the meaning and the symbolism behind the sounding of Reveille, the sounding of that trumpet every morning as the flag goes up and every evening as the flag goes down on every single military base in the United States and around the world. Why do these traditions matter? Because in the midst of the busyness, in the midst of the noise, in the midst of all of these assaults on our time and consciousness and our everyday lives, to take that moment and pause and express gratitude for what this flag stands for the many who have sacrificed all in service to our country. We need more of that in our country today, where unfortunately we have too many people, both everyday Americans, but especially people in positions of power, who maybe haven't taken that moment to pause and reflect in a very long time. When I ran for president in 2020, I held 4, 5, 6 town halls every single day wherever I was in the country, and I made it a point as people were coming in and signing in before they found their seats. I had a stack of pocket-sized constitutions that we gave out to every person who came to those town halls. And one of the reasons that I did that was, obviously we should all know and appreciate and understand the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, the purpose that our founders had in mind when they crafted these founding documents. But the reason that I did this was actually rooted in an experience that I had in my early days as a member of Congress. When I was elected in 2012, sworn in January of 2013, later that year, around Constitution Day, I got an email saying, hey, it was a mass email, all members of Congress, you're invited to come to the House floor and read a portion of the Constitution into the congressional record. And this is an annual tradition that was taking place, just as this moment to pause and remember that oath that we took, every one of us, to support and defend the Constitution, and what does that actually mean? So I was happy to receive the email, signed my name up, and went down on Constitution Day to read a portion of the Constitution. And it wasn't one of the most well-known portions or one that kind of hits you in the face with its power. It was one of the lesser-known provisions. But I was grateful to be able to be a part of what I saw was an important bipartisan tradition. One of the problems, though, was that I noticed there weren't very many Democrats who had signed up to participate in this, and it surprised me. And so I asked some of my former colleagues then, did you not know about this? Did you not get the email? And seeing as how I was one of the freshmen in Congress, I was gently chided by a few of my former colleagues saying, oh, Tulsi, you're new here. You don't quite know the ropes yet. This happens every year, and it's a right-wing Republican tradition, so we don't participate in this. It really made me sad. I was surprised to hear it. That something as essential as reading and reflecting on the Constitution had now been relegated to some quote-unquote right-wing conservative Republican thing. What I didn't realize back then, but what I realized over the 8 years that I served in Congress, and what is very stark and clear to us today, is that that mindset is what is driving the decisions that are being made by the Democrat elite in Washington to undermine our Constitution and essentially throw it in the trash. This is the danger and the threat that we face in this country today. To have people in the highest positions of power have such disregard for the founding documents of our country is what has led to this brazen abuse of power. There are so many Americans who are recognizing where this threat is coming from. They are recognizing, as I have, I was a Democrat for over 20 years, it is this disregard for our fundamental rights and freedoms and this hatred for the limitations that our Constitution places on their power that drove me to leave the Democratic Party behind. There's a couple of you who I had a chance to meet a little bit earlier today who mentioned, my gosh, what a journey you have been through to go from serving as a vice chair of the DNC to today calling on my fellow Americans to leave the Democrat Party behind. The party has become unrecognizable. I'm sure I'm not alone here in this room, or those who are watching at home, in feeling like President John F. Kennedy wouldn't belong in the Democrat Party of today. It was his ideals and his leadership and his principles that attracted me to join the Democratic Party over 20 years ago. It used to be the party of free speech. It used to be the party that had a big open tent and welcomed people of all different views and backgrounds and actually encouraged vigorous debate, conversation, dialogue, respected our rights as Americans, whether it be the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, or respecting our civil liberties and ensuring that our government didn't overreach into our everyday lives and violate those civil liberties. For us in Hawaii, it was a party that fought for the little guy. Everything has turned on its head today. Everything that I just mentioned, the Democrat Party of today stands for the exact opposite. I am hopeful in this time, especially in this election year, because I know that there are far more Americans who love our country and who cherish peace and freedom, and who are disturbed about what the Democrat elite are doing to our country today. The reality is that for me, I can say with confidence that this election is the most important election of my life. How many times have you heard politicians say that? It's a line you might hear every 2 years, right? You might hear every 4 years. I was talking with the former governor of Mississippi recently, and I expressed this to him, that this, for me, is the most important election of my life. And I've never said that before. And he said, oh, yeah, I say that all the time, especially when I'm on the ballot. I've never said it before because I've always heard it and been like, all right, was it last time or is it this time? Make up your mind. The reason why I am here, the reason why I wrote this book for love of country is because our fundamental rights and principles are under direct assault, not from some foreign power, but from a threat right here at home. If we allow those who are abusing their power to stay in power, those who are undermining our Constitution, our democracy, to stay in power, those who are taking away our freedoms and pushing censorship and smearing of those who dare to challenge their position or their authority. If they win in this election, if we don't hold them accountable, then everything that we've seen over these last 4 years will not only continue, it will escalate. Because what happens when politicians are reelected? Even if it's by the smallest of margins, they feel justified in their actions and their policies, and they will tell we, the American people, you have given us a mandate to continue the great work that we have done. So we are going to do that and do more. And they will have set a new precedent, a new norm in this country, that the party that is in power can weaponize all the levers of their power against their political opponents, whether it be their political opponent on the ballot or everyday Americans who disagree with their position. This is the exact opposite of what our founders envisioned for us, which is why they wrote and crafted the Constitution as they did. Now, these abuses of power aren't new to our country. We've seen them happen over the history of our country. What's different is how they have become so brazen. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. Almost every day there's a new headline popping up that reveals some new authority they have given to themselves, some new power grab. And what's so offensive to me is that they think that we, the American people, are too stupid to see what's going on. They tell us to our faces, the border is secure. Don't worry, we got this under control. The reality is very different for anybody in the country who's paying attention. The reality is the Biden-Harris administration is essentially aiding and abetting the cartel's multi-billion-dollar human trafficking industry and making our country less safe in the process. About a month ago, I had the opportunity to come and we went and visited your border in San Diego. And my husband's a cinematographer. We went there intentionally and we had 2.5 days of filming everything that we saw and experienced. And we did that because I know from my own visits to Texas and the Arizona border, they are often featured in the news, and rightly so. But what about your border here in California, which faces a very unique challenge? It's a little different from some of our other southwestern states. And what I saw surprised even me, how well-oiled this illegal human trafficking industry is. We didn't have to drive very far to come across a group of illegal immigrants from all over the world, all gathered, sitting peacefully, joking, laughing, sharing snacks, talking story, as we say in Hawaii, with each other, just waiting for Border Patrol to come and pick them up. Went and talked to some of them. I talked to a guy who had just crossed the border from Colombia, and I asked him, have you been here before? He said, oh yeah, many times. How'd you get here? Because he wasn't sweaty, dirty, or in pain, or didn't seem to be experiencing any hardships. I said, how'd you get here? He said, oh, I flew in through Tijuana. You either fly in through Tijuana or Mexicali and then just come across the border. He was very matter of fact and open about this. And I asked him what his plans were. Where are you going? He said, oh, I'm going to Utah. I said, have you been there before? Yep. I said, oh, okay. What do you want to do in Utah? He said, I'm going to go see a woman. A friend of mine who lives in San Diego who was with me exchanged numbers with this guy and said, hey, I'd love to know what your experience is going through our processing here. Less than 24 hours later, this guy from Colombia texted my friend through WhatsApp and said, hey, I'm out. I'm at the airport. I'm headed to Utah. Less than 24 hours. This was a similar conversation that I had with people over and over, not only there, but came across another group. This time there were 300 or 400 illegal immigrants, all gathered, sitting, lined up, very organized, following the instructions of the 2 Border Patrol agents who were there waiting for vans to come and pick them up. There were very clearly gang members from Venezuela there. One was extremely high on drugs. There were families there from many other countries, from Kazakhstan and from Turkey, from Sri Lanka, Nepal. We came across another group of people wandering through the Otay Mountains, quite far up, who were from Egypt, asking for water. And the thing that surprised me, if you watch the news, they talk about the gotaways, that our Border Patrol agents are vastly understaffed, undermanned, under-resourced. And so they talk about the gotaways. And I was under the impression that that number would be high because, of course, people coming across our border illegally would not want to be intercepted by law enforcement. The opposite is true. They know exactly where to go and gather once they come across the border, knowing that Border Patrol will pick them up there because they want that piece of paper that says they have come here and are claiming asylum. They'll get a court date that's years down the line, but no accountability, no ability to track, no idea where they're going, and many of them not having any identification. I couldn't take 3 steps across the border wall, down the border wall, without running into a pile of destroyed passports, government ID cards, government notarized government papers and documents that would tell us who these people are and where they're coming from. So it caused me to question, well, what happens when you go through this processing? And they say, well, what's your name? Where are you from? Where's your identification? Well, I don't have it. The cartel took it. We have no idea who is in our country. We have no idea what their intent is. We have no idea where they are or how to find them. And so when you look at what the consequences of this are, when you look at how demoralized our Border Patrol agents are, how they have essentially become these glorified Uber drivers for people who are breaking our laws, their first act in entering our country, and you compare that with a dear friend of mine who served as a Special Forces soldier for over 31 years. He's about to retire. His wife is from Europe, and her sister is a resident of Italy. She's got a husband, she's got young kids in school, they've got jobs and a house and a whole life there. They want to come to his retirement ceremony. They've applied for tourist visas to come to the United States for 2 years as residents of Italy. Denied. Denied. And so when you look at that hypocrisy of the fact that they can't even come here for 2 weeks to say thank you to their brother-in-law for his decades of service to our country, but if they got on a plane and flew to Tijuana as a family, they could walk across the border and be here in less than 24 hours to attend his retirement ceremony. It's madness. It's madness. And then you follow this track. Well, instead of using the FBI to try to figure out, okay, who is in our country? Where are they? Where are the Islamist Hezbollah sleeper cells that we know exist in our country? Maybe we should be paying attention to these domestic threats that are growing. What to speak of the crimes that are taking place, or illegal immigrants in some of these cities. The recent article I saw said a guy had been arrested 10 times and set free 10 times for committing violent crimes. No accountability. So why aren't our law enforcement officials, why is the Biden-Harris administration not directing them towards actually protecting us and ensuring our security here at home? Instead, what are they doing? They have them going after their political opponents, the people that President Biden has labeled as the greatest domestic threat, MAGA Republicans. You remember that speech in Philadelphia that President Biden gave, placing a target on the backs of quote unquote MAGA Republicans. And when you hear any of the Democrats in Washington talking about Republicans, it is MAGA Republicans, knowing that because President Biden said this group of Americans are the greatest domestic threat to democracy that we face, it creates a very dangerous situation. And so it begs the question, who are these MAGA Republicans? I thought so. It's the Moms for Liberty. Moms who are standing up across the country. I've met them in almost every city and state that I've gone to. They are moms, or they are teachers, or they small business owners, moms who are standing up and saying, no, I am taking ownership for what happens to my kids. These are the greatest domestic threats to democracy, according to Joe Biden. It's the parents who go and protest at Board of Education meetings. That President Biden's Department of Homeland Security created a domestic terror unit, to be able to go and surveil and target those who are protesting, rightfully so, at these Board of Education meetings. Those MAGA Republicans who are calling for secure borders. Those MAGA Republicans who are peaceful pro-life protesters who are being pursued by federal law enforcement agents still. Those who challenge Biden's latest egregious action, completely destroying and undermining Title IX through the stroke of a pen, completely circumventing Congress, over 50 years of progress for women to have a level, equal playing field when it comes to girls and women in sports, and to get those scholarships will help them further their education, that creates opportunities for them later in their lives. Over 50 years of Title IX working in the way that it was intended to, and literally being created out of a recognition, hey, there are biological differences between boys and girls. Boys had a lot of opportunity, girls not so much. Let's fix that. And they did. With the stroke of a pen, that was legislation passed through Congress. The Biden-Harris administration probably had an idea that if they tried to go through Congress and undermine Title IX by adding the word transgender into it, which in and of itself undermines the intent of Title IX, that it would fail. So again, no respect for our democratic republic, no respect for those that we vote for, who we elect to serve in those positions, who we can hold accountable. Instead, they back-channeled this through the administrative state, undermining all of those 50-plus years of progress in an act that is the ultimate expression of hostility and hatred towards women and girls, saying, no, we're taking this away from you. To add insult to injury, they threaten our publicly funded schools, saying if you don't abide by this rule change, as many schools in some states are saying that they are not going to comply, then they will use the biggest point of leverage that they have, money. And it's not just any pot of money. The Biden-Harris administration says if you don't comply with this new definition of Title IX that takes away rights and opportunities for girls and women in sports, we're going to take away the funding for free and reduced lunch, which for those of you who are familiar, that's a federal pot of money that's available for kids who come from poor families and who can't afford to buy breakfast or lunch at school. So they're going to threaten the most vulnerable of the most vulnerable in our children unless these school administrators go along with this insanity of trying to erase women and girls. And these are the people who claim to be the compassionate party, the people who claim to be the party who stands for women. the party who takes care of those in our society who are the most vulnerable. When we pay attention to their actions and what they are doing, we can see once again that the effect of their policy is exactly the opposite of what they claim to stand for. This is a common thread that we must pay attention to because they're good at the sound bites. They're good at claiming to be the party of the people. They're good at claiming to be the party of democracy. But it's a distraction tactic because they don't want us to pay attention to what they're actually doing. Just like foreign dictators in other countries are afraid of a true free society and democracy, we're seeing these actions play out because the Washington elite are so afraid of a free people living in a free country, having the right to think for ourselves and make our own decisions for ourselves. They're so, and this should give you some hope that the driving motivation behind all of their actions is their deep-seated fear that a free people will reject them and make the quote-unquote wrong choice in this election. What is that wrong choice? Choosing someone other than them. And so they really believe that they are justified in this, that they're willing to use all of the power of the Department of Justice, of law enforcement, and the national security state, weaponizing them for political purposes to take away our freedom. We saw over 32 states try to remove Donald Trump from the ballot, unilaterally, whether it be a small group of judges or an individual elections officer, unilaterally saying, nope, we don't think he's qualified to be on the ballot. I was so heartened to see that the Supreme Court unanimously rejected that position and settled that, as they should, but also how revealing it was to see how the Democrat elite responded to the Supreme Court's actions. As much as they criticized Donald Trump and the quote-unquote MAGA Republicans for not having a respect for the rule of law, in that ruling they said, how dare the Supreme Court not uphold its constitutional responsibility to protect democracy? I can't even explain the lack of logic in that statement because there is none. There is none. And then they say, well, because the Supreme Court failed to fulfill their responsibility, now we have to leave the fate of democracy and freedom in this country to the American people. As the last resort. It's funny, but it's so deeply disturbing because they really believe this. They really believe that they and they alone are the ones who can save us from ourselves, that they will destroy our democracy in order to save it, that they will take away our freedom to see what information we want, to be able to say our opinions, our views as we choose, because they need to protect us from hurting and harming ourselves, or getting information that may not be true or factual, or information or comments or statements that they deem as hate speech or misinformation or disinformation, because they got to protect us from making decisions based on wrong information. Naturally, when they are the ones spreading misinformation, I have yet to hear a single apology to say, hey, we were wrong, especially in the wake of COVID. All that has been revealed in these last years about how wrong they were time and time and time and time again, not a single apology, not a single, you know what, we were wrong. We will do better next time. They continue to point the finger at us. Now, along this theme, I can't not talk about what's in the news today with what's going on in New York. When you look at the sequence of events that have led to this moment, you really have a perfect example of what it looks like when you have dictator-type actions coming from the Democrat elite, from President Biden. And for people who say, oh, well, he doesn't know, he doesn't have anything to do with what's going on in New York, give me a break. You look at a district attorney who campaigned on a promise to destroy Donald Trump, to prosecute Donald Trump. You look at a judge selection, a judge who was not even within the pool of judges that they were supposed to select from. They picked him, handpicked him, and made him an acting judge, who, by the way, had been admonished by their, I believe it was their Judge Ethics Commission for having made illegal contributions to Democrats. And then you look at the confusing jury instructions that are unprecedented in our country that all but ensure that there's a guilty verdict. I'm not a lawyer. I know we have many lawyers here in the room today, but it seems crazy for a judge to instruct the jury that they can disagree on what crime Trump committed, and he will treat it as a unanimous decision. I've never heard of that in my life. And the jury was clearly confused about this crazy instruction that they had to go back to the judge and say, we don't, what are we doing? And literally ask the judge, what crimes has Trump been accused of committing that we have to find him either guilty or not guilty of? To go through all of these weeks of this trial and for the jury to still be confused and not know what decision that they were making says everything that we need to know about this bogus trial. Today we found out for the first time what crimes Trump has actually been charged with. This is not the America that my brothers and sisters and I, who wear the uniform, risk our lives to defend. These people have so completely defied all that we hold dear. And so it's personal to me and to so many others that when we swear that oath to support and defend the Constitution, to be willing to lay down our lives to ensure the safety, security, and freedom of the American people, it is not only heartbreaking, it's maddening to see these people in the highest positions of power in our country so completely disrespecting our flag, our Constitution, and treating our liberty, our freedom, as something that is within their power to give and to take away as they choose. It's almost as though they haven't read the Declaration of Independence. It's almost as though they are unaware of the fact that our founders recognized the truth, that our rights and liberties come from God and no one else. And so no one in government our founders put these words into that declaration because they wanted to remind anybody who got into power, who had a crazy idea of thinking they could take away our freedoms. This was a reminder that these are inalienable rights endowed upon us by our Creator. Among them, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You'll see in my book, I dedicate a chapter to this situation, this mindset. It's a chapter about God. It's a chapter about where we gain our fundamental inalienable rights from and how dangerous it is when we have people in power who ultimately believe that they are the ultimate authority. They believe that they are a higher authority than God and that they have the power to take these rights away. You can look at examples throughout history, examples in present day of leaders who believe this, and the dangerous actions that derive from those who believe they are more powerful than God. All of the outrage, all of the sadness, all of the fear that I feel, it's natural for us to feel as Americans who love our country, should motivate us to take action. I don't want you going home tonight depressed. You're like, too late. But you won't go home tonight feeling depressed, because understanding why the Democrat elite are doing what they are doing, it's because deep down inside they know that they are weak when we take action based on the power that is given to us in our Constitution. They know that when we stand united as Americans, who may have different views on different issues, who may have different ideas on how we solve the great problems of our time, but who stand together united on the foundation of freedom and our ability to live in a peaceful and prosperous society, we are the greatest threat to their power. And that is the call to action that we have. We just observed Memorial Day on Monday, a day to pause. For those of us who have served, for those of us who have lost brothers and sisters who paid that ultimate price, it's a tough day, because we remember the times that we spent with them. We remember the jokes and laughter that we shared. We remember those cold nights in the field, miserable, and yet somehow enjoying our bond and our time together. And we have this opportunity to reflect upon their sacrifice, and even with the sadness and the sense of loss that we feel, celebrate who they are. And ask ourselves, how do we best honor them? They sacrificed their lives in service to a country to defend freedom. How can we defend that freedom? How can we best honor their legacy? It's by not losing sight of what we can accomplish when we, the people, stand together. It's not losing sight of the fact that our founders placed in our hands the power to have a government of, by, and for the people. That they reminded us that our government only exists with the consent of the governed. So we see our free speech under attack. We have to protect the free speech of all Americans. We have to stand up and exercise our voices, use our freedom of speech to defend others whose freedom of speech may be attacked. We have to stand up for the freedom of religion in our country and make sure that our government protects that right. Not only the freedom to worship as we choose, but to express that in the way that we choose, whether it be in private or in public. We have to stand up and recognize the fact that our founders passed the Second Amendment after the First for a very specific reason. They understood the fragility of this system of democracy, and how those in power, unfortunately, are too often tempted to abuse that power. And so they passed the Second Amendment after the First in the event of a tyrannical government trying to take away our free speech, to serve as that check on that abuse of power. We have to elect leaders who understand these facts, who are committed to truly upholding that oath of office that they take, who understand that vision that our founders had for our country. On January 27th in 1838, President Lincoln delivered a speech that was powerful then, but is very prescient to the moment that we are facing in this country. He spoke to the Young Men's Lyceum of Springfield, Illinois, and said, quote, "At what point then is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide." Those in power today are leading our great nation towards that suicide that President Lincoln warned against. If we fail to take action in this moment to save our country, we will wake up on the other side of the election and look back on this moment with regret. But we won't be able to say, we didn't see this coming. We didn't have anyone to warn us about where this path leads. So how do we do it? How do we save our country? It's by lifting up our voices, defending our freedoms, and turning out to vote. Yes, there are problems with the integrity of our elections. We know this already. The only way we fix those problems is by winning this election and defeating those and holding to account those who have no qualms about using every tool in their toolkit to win an election. We have to come together. We have to come together not inspired by hatred of those who are destroying our country, not inspired by fear of what they are doing, but inspired by our love for our country, our love for God, our love and appreciation for each other as fellow Americans, because that is the most powerful force that has the power to defeat evil and hatred and darkness. We live in the greatest country in the world with limitless potential for a brighter future. And to make this future possible, it will require enduring some discomfort. It will require reaching out to people who may not naturally come to a room like this. It will require having conversations with people who you know are probably going to disagree with you on some things. But reaching out with respect, with what we in Hawaii call aloha, actually listening, truly listening to what is on their heart. What do they care about? And being able to have that meaningful exchange, learning more about their experience, their fears, their hopes, their concerns, and sharing what's on your heart. And finding a way to that common ground that is centered on our foundation of freedom. This is how we save our country. We cannot be pitted one against the other. We can't allow those in power to continue to divide us. We have to understand that they are doing this for a reason, because as long as we are attacking each other, calling each other names, we're not paying attention to the devastating and destructive actions that they are taking that impact us. So just as you would extend a hand toward a friend in need, I encourage you to extend a hand to those in your life and welcome them into the big tent of freedom. Don't underestimate your ability to have influence on others, the power that you have in your hands. I don't accept those who say, I'm just one person. I can't make a difference. I don't have a big podcast, or I only have 1,000 followers on Twitter or X. I don't accept people who say it's not worth the energy because I'm just one person and my vote won't count. You shouldn't accept that either. Whether you are a stay-at-home parent or you own a business or you're an attorney or a teacher or a doctor or a nurse or a firefighter or a police officer, I guarantee you, you have a huge circle of people in your life who trust you, and who will listen when you share what is on your heart and your concern for our country's future. Have those conversations. Impart upon them the imperative that we face today. Because what we face before us in this election is a no-fail mission to save our country and to defend our freedom. We must prevail. It is by God's grace that we are free and will remain free. The power is in our hands. We must take action. Thank you very much. God bless you all. God bless America. Thank you. Thank you so much. Aloha. Thank you. Don't leave yet. Don't leave yet.
Congresswoman,
I'm going to take a few questions here.
Yeah, Congresswoman, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
We are tight on time. We've got to get into a book signing. So we'll take just a couple of questions. I thought it would be fitting for our first one to come from these young leaders standing behind me that presented the colors tonight. What is your question?
What motivated you to join the military?
Like a lot of Americans, it was the terrorist attack on 9/11 that spurred me to want to do my part to serve our country. I chose to join the National Guard at that time in Hawaii so that I could both serve my state and my community during a time of need and answer the call to action to serve our country and go after the Islamist terrorists who attacked us on that day. Thank you. Thank you for your choice.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Center section to your left.
Thank you for being here. I'd like to ask you about term limits. How do you feel about them?
I think term limits are a worthy conversation for us to have, but we have to understand what the consequences are. And here are the two concerns that I have with term limits. Number one is it takes away our choice and our right to be able to cast our vote for the person of our choosing. If we have someone who's doing a good job, I believe we should have the right to allow them to keep doing a good job. If we have someone who's doing a bad job, we should send them home. The second thing is, and this is the unintended negative consequence that I've seen in some states that have enacted term limits, is that the power that comes from money and corporate lobbyist interests is shifted away from the elected official who may only be there for a few years, and that attention is then placed on unelected staff and administrators. People who, as you have higher turnover in those who are elected because of term limits, will then go to the chiefs of staff or the other administrative staff who are the constant in those positions, the ones who the elected leaders may turn to and say, hey, show me the ropes. We've got this issue coming up. How do you recommend I vote on it? Give me the backdrop on this issue. And so we lose much of that ability to hold those to account. Knowing that, I think the first step is both at the state level and the federal level, you get rid of the corporate lobbyists, you get rid of the power that goes with incumbency. And it is the thing that allows people like Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell, frankly, to stay in power for as long as they do. Even people who run for office for the first time, maybe they get a majority of their contributions to run their campaign from people in their community. You see there's a trend. The longer they're in power in Washington, the more that ratio shifts from the majority of their contributions coming from voters who are electing them and support them, and shifting to the vast majority of it, 80%, 90% coming from corporate lobbyists. And these people spend all their time, breakfast, lunch, and dinner fundraisers in Washington, every single day that they are there, and those are the people who they are serving. That to me is the way we can really transform this problem that causes us to think, well, hey, maybe term limits will be the solution? Great question. Thank you.
Next question back to the room, Congresswoman.
Hi, Talofa. I'm
Talofa.
Polynesian and namely Samoan. I was born in American Samoa, very much where the island where your father and you're from. The question is, what's the threat of China, especially with the island chains, South Pacific, China Sea? Is there a great threat there? Should World War III happen? Just curious.
I recently, through my other job in the Army Reserve, I've been in the military now for over 21 years. We recently went and spent some time in many of these small Pacific Island countries, the Federated States of Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and others. There is a very real competition going on. The risk that I see is that people are talking about going to war with China as though it is some small matter. There is a very, you talk to, and I've talked and had conversations with some of our highest ranking military leaders who both privately and publicly say that if we go to war with China, the level of casualties that we will see of Americans will be unlike anything we have seen since World War II. That the number of American troops that we lost in the entire post 9/11 generation of service members and wars and conflicts is minuscule in comparison to the loss that we will see in a few short weeks of that war. The economic cost on our country is something that I have yet to see an economist who can accurately project the devastating effect that such a war would have on our economy. So what I want from our leaders and what we should expect from our leaders is to make our foreign policy decisions based on what is in the best interest of the American people, our country, our security, and our freedom. And understand and be honest with the American people about what the costs and consequences are. If they want to take us to war, tell us the truth about what we will have to endure as a result of this war. Whether it's what's going on in Asia, the Asia-Pacific region as a whole, or what's going on in Europe, what's going on in the African continent, which doesn't get talked about very much, what's going on in the Middle East. There are many, many fronts where we are on the brink of war or engaging in new Cold Wars because of the decisions being made by the Biden-Harris administration and neocons in Washington. And they are not acting in our best national security interests, and they are not being honest with us about the negative consequences of their decisions. It's a complex environment, and one that should be treated with the nuance and complexity that exists before rushing into yet another war that could lead to World War III and nuclear Armageddon.
Okay, Congresswoman, we are incredibly tight with time. We have to get through quite a big book signing. We will take one final question. It is from one of our young patriots here in the back of the room. Young man, what is your question?
If Trump chooses you as your VP, will you accept it, or is there somewhere else you think that you can help more?
I have dedicated my entire adult life to serving our country, and if asked to serve in that way, I would be honored to do so.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's give her a huge round of applause.
Thank you.
Tulsi Gabbard, Congresswoman, thank you. She will be up front to sign your books. We'll see you up there shortly. Thank you for coming. Good night.
Thank you so much.